February 25, 1957. A college student chasing a rabbit through the woods of Philadelphia makes a discovery that will haunt America for over 6 decades. Hidden in the underbrush, wrapped in a plaid blanket inside a J.C. Penney bassinet box, lies the beaten and malnourished body of a 4-year-old boy. His hair has been freshly cut, his fingernails trimmed, but his small body tells a horrific story of abuse and neglect. For 65 years, he was known only as the boy in the box, America's unknown child. His case became one of the most enduring mysteries in criminal history, capturing the hearts of investigators, journalists, and ordinary citizens who refused to let him be forgotten. Hundreds of thousands of flyers were distributed. His body was exhumed multiple times. Theories emerged and crumbled, yet his identity remained locked away, seemingly forever. Before we dive into this extraordinary case, make sure to like this video and subscribe. This is a story that will stay with you long after it ends, a tale of how modern science finally gave a name to a child who had been silenced by violence. Then, on December 8, 2022, the impossible happened. The boy finally got his name back, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Joseph Augustus Zarelli was born on January 13, 1953, to Augustus John Zarelli, known as Gus, and Mary Elizabeth Plunkett, known as Betsy. The family lived in the area of 64th and Callowhill in Philadelphia, though it remains unclear how long young Joseph actually resided there or whether neighbors even noticed his presence. What we know about Joseph's short life is written in the scars across his small body. When his remains were discovered, forensic examination revealed a child who had endured systematic abuse and severe neglect. His body bore multiple surgical scars, an L-shaped mark under his chin, scars on his ankle and groin that suggested previous medical interventions. Most telling of all, Joseph showed signs of chronic malnutrition, indicating prolonged starvation. The discovery itself came through a chain of reluctant witnesses. On that cold February day in 1957, a young man checking his rabbit traps in the Fox Chase neighborhood woods stumbled upon something that made him flee in horror. Fearing police would confiscate his illegal traps, he kept silent about his grisly find. Days passed. The small body remained hidden in the wilderness off Susquehanna Road, wrapped in its plaid shroud inside the cardboard bassinet box. Then fate intervened in the form of a college student who spotted a rabbit darting into the underbrush. Knowing about the traps in the area, he stopped his car to investigate, perhaps hoping to free the animal. Instead, he found Joseph. The student was also reluctant to contact authorities, but news reports about a missing girl named Mary Jane Barker finally compelled him to overcome his hesitation. The following day, he made the call that would launch one of Philadelphia's most intensive and enduring investigations. When police arrived at the scene, they encountered evidence of meticulous preparation mixed with shocking cruelty. Joseph's body had been carefully cleaned and groomed after death. His hair had been recently cut, so recently that clumps still clung to his skin. His fingernails were neatly trimmed. Someone had taken time to make him presentable, as if preparing him for a final viewing. Yet this careful grooming couldn't hide the evidence of prolonged abuse. Bruises covered his small frame. The surgical scars told stories of previous trauma. His emaciated condition spoke of systematic starvation. The forensic evidence painted a picture of a child who had suffered tremendously before his death, which pathologists determined resulted from blunt force trauma to the head. The location chosen for Joseph's disposal suggested local knowledge. The wooded area off Susquehanna Road was remote enough to avoid immediate discovery, yet accessible by car. Someone familiar with the neighborhood had selected this spot, perhaps hoping the body would never be found. Joseph Augustus Zarelli had lived barely 4 years, but the horror of his death would echo through decades, touching the lives of countless investigators, journalists, and citizens who refused to let him remain nameless in death. Philadelphia police launched what would become one of the most extensive missing person investigations in the city's history. On February 26, 1957, the day after receiving the report, investigators began what they initially expected to be a straightforward identification case. They took fingerprints from the small body and confidently predicted the child would soon be identified and claimed by family. They couldn't have been more wrong. Detective work in 1957 relied heavily on physical evidence and community cooperation. The crime scene became a focal point for intensive searching. A team of 270 police academy recruits combed through every inch of the woods, hoping to find clues that might lead to the boy's identity or killer. Their efforts yielded several items: a man's blue corduroy cap, a child's scarf, and a white handkerchief with the letter G embroidered in one corner. Each discovery raised hopes and spawned theories, but none led anywhere concrete. The cap could have belonged to anyone. The scarf might have been lost by any child playing in the woods. The handkerchief with its mysterious G became a particular focus of speculation, but no connection to the case was ever established. Understanding the power of a public appeal, Philadelphia police partnered with the Philadelphia Inquirer to launch an unprecedented publicity campaign. The newspaper printed 400,000 flyers featuring post-mortem photographs of Joseph, dressed and positioned to appear as he might have looked in life. These haunting images were distributed throughout Philadelphia and the Delaware Valley, tucked into every gas bill sent to city residents. The response was overwhelming, but ultimately fruitless. Tips poured in from concerned citizens, but none provided the breakthrough investigators desperately needed. Families came forward claiming the boy might be their missing relative, but each lead dissolved under scrutiny. Media coverage extended beyond Philadelphia, making the case nationally known. The boy earned the heartbreaking nickname America's Unknown Child, symbolizing every parent's worst nightmare and society's failure to protect its most vulnerable members. Theories began emerging almost immediately. Some suggested the child was a victim of abuse who had been hidden from neighbors and authorities. Others proposed he might have been trafficked or sold. The evidence of previous medical care, indicated by the surgical scars, suggested someone had once cared enough to seek treatment for him, making his ultimate fate even more tragic. As months turned to years with no identification, the case took on an almost mythical quality. Joseph's story became a rallying cry for missing children everywhere, though the boy himself remained stubbornly anonymous despite the massive investigative effort and public attention focused on his case. The investigation that began with such optimism had struck its first major wall, and it would remain there for decades. The breakthrough that would finally give Joseph Augustus Zarelli his name back came not from traditional detective work, but from the intersection of modern science and family connections that spanned generations. In 2021, more than 6 decades after his death, genealogists working with Philadelphia police achieved what seemed impossible. They cracked the case that had stumped investigators for 65 years. The key breakthrough began with a cousin of Joseph's who made a seemingly routine decision to upload their DNA to a public database. This individual had no idea they were related to America's unknown child, but their genetic information would prove to be the missing link investigators had been searching for since 1957. Genetic genealogy had revolutionized cold case investigations in recent years, using the same techniques that help people find distant relatives to identify victims and suspects in criminal cases. When Joseph's case was entered into this new investigative framework, the uploaded DNA from his cousin created the first concrete connection to a living family member. Investigators, working with genetic genealogists, encouraged the cousin's mother, Joseph's first cousin, to submit her genetic profile to GED Match, a public database that allows law enforcement access for investigative purposes. This second DNA sample provided the critical confirmation needed to establish Joseph's family tree. The genetic evidence pointed investigators toward a specific family lineage, but DNA alone couldn't provide Joseph's name. Armed with this genealogical roadmap, investigators petitioned the court for access to birth certificates from the relevant time period and family connections. When the court order was granted, it revealed the birth certificate of Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born January 13, 1953. The DNA evidence from Joseph's tooth, extracted during his 1998 exhumation, was then compared to the newly identified family members. The match was conclusive. After 65 years, America's unknown child finally had his identity restored. Remarkably, genealogists had actually uncovered Joseph's name more than a year before the public announcement in October 2021. The delay between identification and public disclosure allowed investigators time to verify their findings and explore what this new information might reveal about his death. The identification process revealed that Joseph's biological parents, Augustus John Gus Zarelli and Mary Elizabeth Betsy Abel Plunkett, were both deceased by the time of his identification. However, Joseph had living half-siblings, meaning family members existed who could potentially provide crucial information about his life and death. This scientific breakthrough represented a revolution in how cold cases could be approached. The same technology helping people trace their ancestry was now giving voices back to victims who had been silenced by violence. Joseph's identification demonstrated the power of combining cutting-edge genetic science with traditional investigative techniques. Yet, even as Joseph reclaimed his name, the most crucial questions remained unanswered. DNA could tell investigators who he was, but it couldn't reveal who had killed him or why. The breakthrough that ended 65 years of anonymity was simultaneously the beginning of a new investigation, one that would now focus on finding justice for Joseph Augustus Zarelli, no longer America's unknown child, but a real boy with a real name and a family history. With Joseph's identity confirmed, investigators faced the daunting task of reconstructing a 4-year-old's life from more than 6 decades ago. The DNA breakthrough had answered the fundamental question of who Joseph was, but it opened a flood of new questions about how he lived and why he died. Philadelphia police revealed that Joseph had lived in the area of 61st and Market Streets, though the exact duration and circumstances of his residence remained unclear. Captain Jason Smith of the Philadelphia Police Homicide Unit emphasized the significance of this information. The child did live past the age of 4 years old, so there would have been somebody out there that would have seen this child. The investigation team faced unique challenges. Joseph's biological parents, Augustus Gus Zarelli and Mary Elizabeth Betsy Plunkett, had both died years before his identification, taking any direct answers about his life and death to their graves. However, the discovery of living half-siblings provided new avenues for investigation. Law enforcement's approach shifted from identifying Joseph to understanding his family dynamics and living situation. The evidence suggested a complex family structure that investigators are still piecing together. Joseph's birth to unmarried parents in 1953 would have carried significant social stigma, potentially explaining why he might have been hidden from public view. The forensic evidence from 1957 took on new meaning with Joseph's identification. The surgical scars on his body indicated he had received medical care at some point, suggesting someone had cared enough to seek treatment for him. This evidence contradicted theories that he had been completely abandoned or neglected throughout his short life. Investigators began examining historical records, seeking anyone who might have remembered seeing Joseph in the 61st and Market Street area. They reached out to surviving neighbors, former residents, and anyone who might have had contact with the Zarelli family during the relevant time period. The challenge was enormous, finding people with clear memories of events from the 1950s, particularly regarding a child who may have been deliberately kept hidden. The case also benefited from advances in forensic science beyond DNA analysis. Modern techniques allowed investigators to re-examine evidence collected in 1957 with new technological capabilities. Items that seemed insignificant decades ago could now potentially yield crucial information about Joseph's final days. One particularly intriguing aspect of the investigation involved the careful grooming Joseph had received after death. Someone had taken time to cut his hair, trim his nails, and clean his body before disposal. This suggested either remorse from his killer or an attempt to obscure his identity. With Joseph now identified, investigators could explore whether this grooming was meant to hide specific identifying characteristics that family members might recognize. The location where Joseph's body was found also gained new significance. The wooded area off Susquehanna Road was approximately 1.5 miles from a foster home that had been investigated extensively in previous decades. While that theory had been thoroughly debunked, investigators now examined whether there were any connections between Joseph's family and that particular area of Philadelphia. Modern investigative techniques allowed police to create detailed timelines and relationship maps that would have been impossible in 1957. Computer databases could cross-reference addresses, family connections, and historical records in ways that manual investigations never could. Despite these technological advantages, the passage of time remained the investigation's greatest enemy. Key witnesses had died, memories had faded, and physical evidence had deteriorated. Yet investigators remained determined to find answers for Joseph Augustus Zarelli, the boy who had waited 65 years to reclaim his name. The identification of Joseph Augustus Zarelli marked a watershed moment in cold case investigation, but it also highlighted the complex reality of bringing closure to decades-old crimes. While the breakthrough answered the fundamental question of identity, it simultaneously opened new avenues of investigation and raised fresh questions about justice and accountability. Philadelphia Police Commissioner Outlaw made clear that Joseph's case remained an active homicide investigation despite the identification breakthrough. "We still need the public's help," she emphasized at the December 2022 press conference that revealed Joseph's name to the world. The identification was not an ending, but a new beginning in the quest for justice. The impact on Joseph's surviving family members was profound and complex. His living half-siblings suddenly found themselves connected to one of America's most famous cold cases. For 65 years, they may have wondered about their missing half-brother, never knowing he had become a national symbol of unidentified victims. The case's resolution demonstrated the revolutionary potential of genetic genealogy in criminal investigations. Joseph's identification joined a growing list of cold cases solved through DNA databases and family trees, proving that even decades-old mysteries could yield to modern scientific techniques. This success encouraged other families to submit DNA samples, potentially solving additional cases. Law enforcement agencies nationwide took notice of the techniques used in Joseph's case. The combination of traditional investigative methods with cutting-edge genetic genealogy became a model for approaching other unidentified victim cases. The Philadelphia Police Department's persistence over multiple decades, including multiple exhumations to extract better DNA samples, showed the importance of never abandoning these investigations. The community response to Joseph's identification was overwhelming. For 65 years, Philadelphia residents had maintained his grave, decorating it with flowers and toys, treating him as their own lost child. When his name was revealed, the community's connection deepened. On January 13, 2023, what would have been Joseph's 70th birthday, a new memorial was unveiled at Ivy Hill Cemetery, replacing the generic America's Unknown Child marker with his full name and photograph. The case also sparked broader conversations about child protection and family services. How had a 4-year-old child suffered such extensive abuse without intervention? What systems might have failed Joseph during his short life? These questions gained renewed urgency as investigators worked to understand his family situation. Media coverage of the identification reached international audiences, inspiring documentaries, podcasts, and articles that examined both the breakthrough and the ongoing investigation. Joseph's story became a symbol of how persistence, technology, and public commitment could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Yet challenges remained substantial. With Joseph's parents deceased and key witnesses likely gone, finding his killer presented enormous obstacles. The case required investigators to piece together events from 7 decades ago while relying on increasingly fragile evidence and fading memories. Despite these challenges, Joseph's identification represented a victory for every unidentified victim and every family seeking answers about missing loved ones. Joseph Augustus Zarelli's story reminds us that every victim deserves a name, and every life has value worth remembering. For 65 years, he lay anonymous in death, known only by the tragic circumstances of his discovery. His identification proves that patience, persistence, and advancing technology can overcome even the most daunting obstacles in the pursuit of truth. The boy, who was once America's unknown child, now represents hope for hundreds of other unidentified victims across the country. His case demonstrates how genetic genealogy can breathe new life into cold investigations, connecting victims to families who may never have known they were missing someone. Each DNA sample uploaded to public databases potentially holds the key to another family's closure. Joseph's story also reflects broader societal changes in how we approach child protection and victim advocacy. In 1957, resources for investigating crimes against children were limited, and social stigmas often prevented families from seeking help. Today's investigators have tools and perspectives that earlier generations couldn't imagine, yet Joseph's case reminds us that the fundamental need for justice remains unchanged. The continued investigation into Joseph's death keeps his memory alive while seeking accountability for the violence that ended his young life. Every tip from the public, every new piece of evidence, every investigative lead honors his memory and moves closer to the truth about what happened in those final days of his life. Perhaps most remarkably, Joseph's identification demonstrates the power of community commitment. For decades, strangers tended his grave, investigators refused to close his case, and scientists worked to give him back his name. This collective dedication transformed a nameless victim into a symbol of perseverance and hope. The investigation continues, and answers may yet emerge about who killed Joseph Augustus Zarelli and why. His living half-siblings may hold crucial memories, Community members might recall seeing him during his short life. Modern forensic techniques could yield new insights from old evidence. If this remarkable story of identification and ongoing investigation has moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into cases that demonstrate the power of persistence in seeking justice. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Joseph Augustus Zarelli waited 65 years to reclaim his name. Now he deserves justice.